What's up, guys? Max here, back with a brand new episode of the Scuttlebutt Show. And today, on the other line here, so to speak, I am honored to be joined by the author of what has become, and I mean this when I say it, my favorite book of all time. I'm talking about By Water, Beneath the Walls, The Rise of the Navy SEALs. This is a book that will educate you like a textbook, but have you turning pages like a Tom Clancy or Dan Brown novel or something like that. It's truly thrilling and a look at the history of naval special warfare in a way that I can guarantee you've never seen it before. So I'm pleased, proud, honored, humbled to introduce Ben Milligan. Ben, how are you doing?
Hi, Max. I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. It is such a pleasure. I, out of nowhere, emailed you on LinkedIn and said, you know, hi, I'm a stranger. I love your book, and I would love to chat with you about it sometime. And here we are. So I want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here today.
Thanks for reaching out.
For everyone watching out in the chat, if you have any questions you'd like to leave Ben, please throw them in the chat, and I'll try to monitor that and get to them. And I want to thank everyone who's come here today to listen to this conversation. But for anyone who doesn't know, who doesn't regularly listen to the Scuttlebutt Show and has heard me raving about this for the past few weeks, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Let's see. I joined the Navy in 2000. Went almost immediately to BUDS. I had a brief stopover as a sonar tech in San Diego. I picked it because it was the shortest of all the Navy's A schools, and it was in San Diego, so I got to feel what the water was like. I graduated with BUDS class 235. I went to SEAL Team 4. I had a brief after my first platoon. I had a brief time as a contractor overseas, and then got back into the Navy, went to SEAL Team 5. After that, when I got out, I started, I went to grad school and started thinking about, different book ideas, and that's the product that you have in front of you.
Well, we got to talk about the process that led to this product, because for anyone who doesn't know, it's, I know you've heard this a lot, but it can't be overstated how well researched and thoughtful the book is, where you travel through time meeting these unexpected heroes through born out of moments of need, and through failure after failure, this unrelenting spirit to persevere that came out of the Navy and other organizations that just, it's miraculous. And I want to get to a point where I can ask you what you think about kind of this combination, this impossible series of events that led to the organization and formation of the Navy SEALs. But just on you and your background a little bit, was it always the plan to go join the Navy and go to the SEALs, or how long into your life did you make that decision?
I think I was 12 when I told my parents. I think we were sitting at the dinner table, and I looked at my family. We were eating dinner, and I blurted it out awkwardly. And when I grow up, I'm going to be a Navy SEAL. Everybody turned and looked at me. They had no idea what I was talking about. I don't think anybody in my family ever heard Navy and SEAL together as a term. And that led to a series of fights with my parents going through high. Nobody in my family had been in the military. So I kept it to myself for a few years. My senior year, I was getting ready to graduate high school. I didn't show up after a soccer practice. I didn't come home right away. And I think I had gone to the recruiter, and I was there getting ready to, sign up for the Navy, do the delayed entry program. And for whatever reason, my mom had a hunch, and she, right when I was getting ready to sign, on the dotted line, the recruiter, to his credit, he kind of stops me, and he goes, do you know that woman? I turn around, and my mom's got both hands on the glass, and she's sobbing. I stopped. We went out into the parking lot. We had a grown-up conversation. She said, she asked me if I would do, if I would do 1 year of college, and I didn't like it. I could join the Navy. I would have my parents' blessing. I think she probably knew what was going to happen. I've always been bookish and, a little bit of a nerd. So I think she knew that once I just got to college and sort of, encountered what was there, that I would probably stay. And that's what happened. I ended up, 4 years later, I, went through the same process, and I actually tried to go the officer route. I had put a package together, what I thought was a pretty good, application. The officer packages are, you have to have, numerous letters of recommendation. You have to have really, really good PT scores before you do it. I'd been training for a year. I hadn't taken a single hot shower in that year. I thought, I was a shoo-in for, officer candidate school, and then, follow on for buds. Little did I know that, how competitive that process is. And, my, my application had a letter of recommendation from my high school soccer coach. I wasn't destined to be an officer. So when I got my rejection, I talked to my parents. My parents were at that point very supportive, and I left the officer recruiter's office. I walked a few doors down and signed my life away.
So probably saved your butt, huh? Are you glad you went that route?
Yeah, in retrospect, yeah. I mean, what did I know? I'd never talked to a SEAL, met a SEAL. I didn't know what the SEAL teams were, and I didn't know, how different the career paths were. And for somebody who, has this idea of, being a naval commando, the officer route. I mean, you're going to get all the, the same experiences going through buds, but you're not gonna get to go to sniper school or breacher school or all those kind of commando-y type things that you kind of have your heart set on as a young guy.
PowerPoint school. I was I couldn't sorry to get you on a spit take there.
Yeah, right.
I couldn't believe in my time in NSW, if anybody asks me if there was anything that surprised me about NSW, I always say it's the amount of paperwork and the PowerPoints, and
yeah, right.
It really surprised me. So, but then, did you read any books? Did you watch, Charlie Sheen and Navy SEALs? What was your hoo-yah stuff you had going on before going to boot camp?
The Charlie Sheen movie is still the gold standard of SEAL movie.
Absolutely.
No, I watched all the movies. That was forbidden in our household, I think, because my parents were afraid that I would see it and just get more enthusiastic about it. But I read the books. I mean, I read the Marcinko book when it came out. There was a Dick Couch book that I read. Mm-hmm. I mostly avoided it, though. I kind of the SEAL books that were there. I didn't want to be dissuaded from the thing that I wanted. So I knew that's what I wanted to do, but I also didn't want to be, read something and be turned off by it. So I kind of kept my distance, and I definitely kept my distance from books about SEAL training. I didn't want to get scared away. I knew it was going to be cold and it was going to be really, really hard. But I when I got to buds, I had ignored, buds so much that I didn't know, what the next horrible thing that was going to come was, right around the corner. Like when I was in Hell Week, I would ask guys, "Hey, what's next?" I remember one guy looking at me and he's like, "Steel Pier," and I was like, "Okay, what's Steel Pier?" So
I'm pretty sure it's known as a pretty hard part of the Hell Week, right? Pretty cold.
Steel Pier.
Yeah.
Steel Pier's cold. I mean, they get you out there on the cement deck, right there by on the pier in the bay, and it's just they're rotating you in and out of the bay, and you're progressively taking more and more clothes off. So, and then fire hoses and all the rest. So,
but you made it. So you made it through training. And how was that? Pretty proud moment. You were pretty satisfied at that point, or how were you feeling?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's there's nothing like graduating buds. You don't ever want to see cold water again, though. Somebody said recently, a friend that I was talking to, he remembers somebody bumping him in the chow hall after buds, and somebody splashing a little bit of water on him. He gave him serious side eye.
That side eye will let you know.
Yeah.
And then you did a couple deployments. Did you, where did you deploy to?
The first one was to Europe and Africa, and then the second was to Iraq.
Okay. And how was that?
It was good. They're good. They're very, very active deployment.
Yeah, I think that's the question, right? Is were your expectations of deploying as a SEAL met? Do you feel like you got what you came for?
Yeah, they did. I mean, and I ultimately it kind of informed the question that I asked. You know, the deployments that I went on, they were, they were really land focused. You know, I mean, I knew that I was joining, the Navy SEAL teams, and I knew that, I'd just gone through this this incredibly difficult training curriculum, but that entire training curriculum seemed connected to the water and almost divorced from the operations that we ultimately undertook. And it was just one of those, contradictions that I wanted to sort of sort through. But like I wrote in the introduction, I would come back from a deployment, and I'd be asked, why were you there? What were you doing? And that in the instance I describe in the book, my own grandmother, who I thought sort of understood what a SEAL was, she asked me, what were you doing in the middle of Iraq? What's a sailor doing in the middle of Iraq? And I was, I didn't really know the answer, and I didn't know. I didn't understand how this institution had, crept so far, from the ocean. My initial instinct was to say, well, it has to be just because there was, there's a, they need more troops. They need more, the Marine Corps and the Army don't have enough guys to, fill the need. But the more I started to think about it, the more I realized that wasn't the case. I mean, the SEALs had been, moving inland for, multiple generations. I mean, these Navy units have been getting further and further from the Navy. So that's how I got the germ of the idea.
But and what actually, how did the paths converge for you from idea to word? You're starting to put words on paper. Like was there a critical moment where you made the commitment to do this?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I'd always kind of known. I mean, growing up, I'd always sort of been a disciplined reader, and I'd always been interested in history. But I had a vague idea that at some point in my life I wanted to write a history book, but I didn't know what history book I was going to write. And the way that I got this idea, it was both, the way that I got the idea and sort of the kick in the pants to follow through on the idea was 100% the Extortion 17 tragedy. So Extortion 17, for folks that don't know, it was a helicopter that was full of SEALs from Dev Group that was flying in Afghanistan on their way to support a team of Army Rangers that were trying to capture or kill a Taliban warlord. The helicopter was shot down, and something, I think 17 SEALs were killed in that event. It was the largest loss of life for coalition forces in the entire war in Afghanistan. And this had happened 3 months and 4 days after the raid in Abbottabad that killed Osama bin Laden. And so as I was going to the funeral for all of my friends, or so many guys that I had known after the Extortion 17 disaster, I kept thinking, like, there's something remarkable that's happened, in the past couple of months, and that's a Navy unit both has killed the arch villain in the war on terror, and has been responsible for the largest loss of life for coalition forces in Afghanistan. And both of these events had occurred more than 600 miles away from the closest saltwater. It's like, how was a Navy unit responsible for this? How did this happen? So that's sort of where the idea and the motivation kind of collided.
I remember I think everyone listening remembers those events well. Extortion had shook the naval special warfare community, and when you talk to people who were connected directly to somebody from that mission or were part of Dev Group at the time, you can hear the tremor in their voice. You can hear the tone of how they talk about it. You can feel the reverberations that sent through the community. And to this day, it is talked about frequently around naval special warfare, but that sent you, I'm sure, I think there's probably some more details to that because I've listened to you speak.
There was. I mean, one of the things that I did, I went to John Tumbleson's funeral in Rockford, Iowa. It was there that I met Jim Hornfisher. Jim Hornfisher's he's an author, or he was an author. Jim just died earlier this year from a glioblastoma. But before he died, he was one of the country's most preeminent naval historians. So I met Jim Hornfisher at this funeral. I exchanged business, or he gave me his business card. I held on to his business card for 2 years. I kind of knew that he'd be able to connect me to the folks that would publish a book for me. So he shepherded me through that whole process, helped get me my contract to write the book. So I mean, the motivation, the question for how this all happened and the means to do it, it all came from Extortion 17. Without that, I would never have worked on this book.
It's a heavy motivation to carry. But
yeah,
maybe nothing less would have made this possible. No lesser cause would have made this possible, because how long did you take to write this book?
Yeah, that's true. So so that happened in August of 2011. I got the contract for the book 2 years later. I went after Extortion. I went on a kind of a tear of really disciplined reading and really focused reading on the history of American Special Operations. So I pretty much read almost everything that had been written on the SEAL teams, but not just on the SEAL teams, but on American Special Operations in general. And as I was doing that, I was kind of keeping a timeline, and this timeline was just growing and growing and growing. And all I was doing was just like sort of jotting down significant events in that history. So when I had that timeline, and when I had a sense of kind of the book that I was going to write, I drafted a proposal. I got the contract with Random House. They gave me this contract for 100,000 words, due in 2 years. The book ended up being 250,000 words, and I didn't turn it in for 8 years. So it was so long that my editor was no longer working there. My agent had passed away. Oh, they had completely forgotten about me. But I lived with that that terror every day that they were gonna send me an email. Your contract has been voided. Pay us back the money. So, but yeah, I mean, it was at some point after I got the contract and I started to do not just the reading that I've been doing, but the sort of deep archival research that you have to do in order to write a book like this, that I realized this isn't going to be the book that I thought it was going to be. This can be like a wave top book, like so many of the histories that come out before, or this can be something really special. And I had to sort of make a decision really early on, like what are you going to do here? What kind of book are you going to write? And I decided to do that, knowing full well that they could cancel the contract at any time. But I felt like the community needed it. I felt like the community deserved it, and I felt like, for whatever reason, I felt like I could do it. I don't know why. To this day, I don't know why.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions. So I hope one day you find the answer to that, because I can't. It's difficult to imagine it being done better. And And it's funny you say that you were worried that you were going to get the email one day that they were going to cancel your contract, because they would have missed, in doing so, one of the greatest lessons of the book, but also lived right up to the cause of many of the events of this book, which is canceling things when they think they're no longer needed. It's so funny. It's so funny. And I'm glad that they didn't do it. Maybe you were the person to inspire this change. I think, this book's given me a lot to think about. I look at it as a greater than the sum of its parts, as far as these philosophical questions that's caused me to ask. And some of them are quite frustrating as to why, people make people in difficult jobs, managing budgets, deciding what's best for the nation, would decide to cancel the Army Rangers or something like that, like you address early in the book. And we can talk a little bit more about some of that stuff, but I'm so curious. The depths of research that go into this book, the details with which you've told the individual stories are incredible. And then when they collide with sometimes you're reading for a while and you're not sure how this is going to connect to naval special warfare, and then it does, and it's like a eureka moment. It's so great. It gives me it makes the hair on my arm stand up and give me goosebumps. But where did you even start?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the biggest challenge that I had to confront was, how to put brackets around the book. I had a sense of where I wanted to go. I wanted to get to a point where I got to that point in history where the SEAL teams are what they are today. And so I asked myself, well, what are the SEAL teams today? And the SEAL teams today are, sort of a go anywhere, capture, kill commando force. They're behind the lines raiders. They are truly, a universal capability. They can operate, on the depths of the ocean to the tops of mountains. They can operate from naval platforms or platforms that have no connection to the Navy at all. So I knew that evolution had culminated in Vietnam, and I had a vague sense that it happened in, roughly 1968, 1969. So I knew I had to get there, but where to start, that was kind of the challenge. So once I knew that there had been really no effort in American special operations during the First World War, so it brought me up to the Second World War. And then I started to think, well, where's the Navy's first kind of interest in special operations? And I figured out it was with the Marine Corps Raiders. So at least I had, a beginning and I had an end. All I had to do was sort of find those pivotal moments in between those two events and connect them. So I had a sort of a roadmap that I was going to go on. What I didn't really know was why any of these things had happened. But once I established the events, or sort of the battles or the operations, then I was able to sort of dig a little deeper. Okay, so this event, say, the Rangers that you just talked about, so the Rangers, why were they created? Why were they disbanded? And what was the event that led to their disbandment? In the case of Darby's Rangers, the event is the raid on Cisterna, which wasn't really a raid at all. And why did the raid on Cisterna fail? And why did it lead to the biggest disaster in the history of American special operations? Well, the reason that it did was because Darby, who is one of the greatest legends in American special operations history, failed his men. He did not say no to the commanders when they sent him on this raid, which wasn't a raid. So when you identify the mission, you can identify the reason that the mission failed, and then you just sort of backtrack. And then you just have to focus in on the traits of that person. So I would just dig, and try and learn as much as I could about these people. And when you take 10 years to write a book, you have a lot of time, to discover stuff that you wouldn't otherwise have discovered if you're only going to, take 2 years to write a book.
Yeah.
I was finding stuff on Darby. I was finding stuff on characters, up until the last day. I never I never really stopped writing the book. I always feel like the publisher just took it away from me.
Oh yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question is, you publish, because I've been thinking about this. I'm glad I have the opportunity to. I'm truly humbled that I have the opportunity to ask you a question like this. But one of the things I've been walking around thinking about is when this book was done, did you think it was done?
No, that's a good question. I knew I'd taken it to the point that I wanted to take it to. I didn't. There wasn't any. Additional. I didn't want to cover the 70s or the 1980s and take it into Grenada or anything like that. I was happy with the structure. I always felt like there was more that I could do though. There was a detail, and I would wake up in the middle of the night like. Sort of the having that dream that you go to school with no clothes on or something like that I had missed something. There was one book or there was one raid that I had totally forgotten or I just hadn't covered. But yeah, I worked and there chapter 9 was I kept returning to several chapters and kept correcting things or finding additional details. But chapter 9 was one of those chapters, which was the chapter on Arleigh Burke, and when the SEALs are actually created, and and what sort of led to that, or gave Burke the final motivation, which was the Bay of Pigs operation. It took me a long time to sort of figure out where the Cuban frogmen were, and once I found them though, boy, I kept finding them, and they did not want to stop. So they kept sending emails, and I kept getting on the phone with them, and I get another great detail. I was like, yeah, and I'd go back to the manuscript, and I'd send off an email to the publisher. Can we add this? They eventually told me, knock it off. We're done.
Because because there's entire sections of this book with history I knew nothing about. China. I don't want to give a lot of the plot of the book away, but there's a large portion of it that traces back to China, and I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know any of the details about the people who were involved. And
I didn't want to cover it either. I mean, I got there. I had structured the book when I sent the proposal. The proposal was 10 chapters long. And if you look in the book now, it's 15 chapters with an introduction and a conclusion. So I added 5 episodes. I threw out, some of the operations I thought I was going to cover. One of the chapters that I had to squeeze into the book was this China chapter. And I knew that this China episode had happened. I didn't know how important it was. So when I finished my chapter on the UDTs, I thought, okay, I'm done with World War II. I'm moving on to Korea. And so I started working on the Korea chapter, and I thought, well, I know this China stuff had happened. Maybe I can just, fit this stuff in as a sort of introduction, to my China stuff. All this partisan stuff or all this guerrilla warfare stuff had happened. Maybe I can just sort of squeeze it and no one will notice. And the more I started to write this introduction, it went from like 2 pages to 3 pages to 5 pages to 20 pages. Like, what the hell are you doing? I knew I had to stop. I had to put Korea away. I had to focus back on World War II, and I had to focus on this monumental episode that happened. And I knew I had a vague idea. I had no idea it was as important as it was. I had no idea how consequential Mary Miles was or Buck Halpern. I knew vaguely, but not to the detail. And what was so exciting about it was like when I went to start digging up the material for it, I went to the National Archives, and I started typing in Sacco, and box after box after box that nobody has gone through in years. I mean, it's a treasure trove. Somebody should be writing, the definitive history of Sacco. Not me, but somebody. The material is there.
I'm so glad that you chose to go that route because I found that the section on China ended up being, and there's a tease there too with Phil Bucklew when you get to that about China, and it's like, well, now I just want to know all of everything. I want to know every battle. I want to know every skirmish. But you chose them very carefully as to where to place them in the lasting impact that the key events led to, which is great. But one of the great things about the story of the players who were involved in China, and you see this again in Vietnam, is the bond created by the native force and the sailors, Marines, and soldiers who served in these overseas AORs. And so when you find, when you make these connections of how these people impacted each other's lives for lifetimes, that's one of the things that brought me back to, Afghanistan and the withdrawal, and, being inspired by veterans going back to fight for people that they served with over there. And it's like, there's so many themes in the book that are timeless, that, are as true today as they were then. And that was one of them. It was the connection that the people on the ground made with the people that they were fighting alongside and for. Was that deliberate?
It was deliberate, but it was, so one of the objectives that I had, or what wasn't an objective so much as something that I noticed along the way, is that the SEAL teams have a myth of their creation. That myth is that the frogmen, or the UDT frogmen after the Korean War, had sort of seen what was possible, and had sort of gone against the Navy's wishes and pushed inland against all expectations, and against the Navy's will, had sort of rammed this idea for the SEAL teams through the chain of command. And it was all, it was all our own doing, and all, great for us. It was all, nonsense. What I came to, learn is that as adaptable as the UDTs were, as forward-leaning as they were, none of the SEALs or the Naval Special Warfare's evolution would have happened without all these other units that that the SEAL team sort of interacted with. Even from the earliest days of World War II, the Scouts and Raiders, they had an association with the U.S. Army. The NCDUs had an association with the U.S. Army. The underwater demolition teams, they had an association with the Marine Corps, with Marine Recon. All the evolution of Naval Special Warfare wouldn't have happened were it not for all these other units. Not just because of the neglect that the other branches of service showed for the Rangers and for some of these other units, but because of the association that the Naval Special Warfare had. And like you said, was with partisan groups and all of these other units. And so when I was writing, that was one thing that I always wanted to do. I always wanted to shine a light back on these enablers, if you will. Like, Naval Special Warfare isn't just the SEALs. The SEAL teams aren't exclusively responsible for the success of the SEAL teams. It's all of these other folks. And one of the ones that sort of like made me realize that, or unlock that, was Norman Scott, who was he was a cousin of Draper Kaufman. He was commander of a destroyer at the invasion of Tinian, and there was a battleship whose guns were supporting UDT-7 as they were doing a diversionary demolition to the south. And when the battleship's guns got knocked out, he moved his destroyer in between the battleship and the beach to keep fire going above those underwater demolition team swimmers' heads. He literally, moved his ship into the line of fire to protect those swimmers' lives, and lost his life and the life of something like 43 sailors in the process. I mean, the reason that the UDTs had such low casualties is because time and time again, these fleet sailors, these partisans, all these other people, they risked their lives for these, these special units. And yeah, I definitely did want to, sort of highlight that. Anyway. So yeah, I suppose it was a bit intentional.
Yeah. Speaking of Draper Kaufman, and maybe for anyone who doesn't know who that is, maybe you can give us a quick overview.
Talking about Draper Kaufman's is tricky because his his career is so broad and his experiences are just so weird. Not only that, but he's a weirdo. I mean, he's one of the weirdest guys that I write about in the book. He's also, you're not supposed to have favorite characters or anything like that, but he is, you can't help but like him. He's a totally unlikely hero. He doesn't look like a hero when you see pictures of him. He just sort of looks like a nerd. He's not a Phil Buckley type. He's not an athlete or anything like that. He gets kicked out of the Navy in the 1930s after he graduates from the Naval Academy because he has poor eyesight. So he knows that when World War II starts, he's not going to be a part of, the institution that he's dreamed about being a part of his entire, childhood. So he volunteers for the French army. He drives an ambulance. He is in 6 weeks of combat on the when the Germans invade. He becomes a POW. He is released. He goes to Britain against all of the orders and against the wishes of his family. He joins a bomb disposal unit during the Blitz. He ultimately gets pulled back into the U.S. Navy right before Pearl Harbor. He gets sent to Pearl Harbor to dismantle bombs. He's one of the first, legitimate heroes of the war. So he gets put in charge of this program to demolish all of the obstacles that Hitler is erecting on the Atlantic Wall. He knows it's going to be a very, very difficult mission. He knows that the guys that are going to do this have to be really prepared for terrible, terrible combat. He goes to Fort Pierce. He contacts the Navy Scouts and Raiders, who have put together a very, very difficult 8-week-long program to prepare fleet sailors to become Scouts and Raiders. He asks them to take this 8-week-long program and compress it into 5 days for his school. That ultimately is what becomes Hell Week. And that's sort of, it happens there. It happened Hell Week. For anybody who wants to know, the reason that we do it, the reason that it's so important is because it was created by the one person in the U.S. military at that time who had seen the most combat of any other, member of the U.S. military. He knew he knew how hard combat was. He knew how difficult it was. He knew that, often when you got into combat, you hadn't slept for days prior. You're going to be cold, wet, and miserable. So he was preparing, his guys for this horrible crucible. Aside from that, and I don't want to derail the rest of it, but he goes on to the Pacific and he leads UDTs in the Pacific. He's just a weirdo, and he just continually inserts himself in these catastrophic and incredible scenarios.
It's one of the most. I know I've listened to you speak elsewhere, and you talk about the controversy around people, looking at Draper Kaufman as the creator of the, UDTs and the SEAL teams, right, basically, and why that's not exactly why that's not the case at all. Yeah.
No, it's not. No, he's not the father of the UDTs. There's other people that are involved that, are responsible for creating the UDTs, but he's the indispensable man, if you will. He creates Hell Week. He leads the first UDT reconnaissance on Saipan. He leads the incredibly important reconnaissance in Tinian. And then he goes on to command UDT swimmers again and again, and campaign after campaign throughout the Central Pacific, all the way to Okinawa. So he's and people are dying around him left and right. I mean, he barely notices. It's not just because he can't see very well. He just was oblivious. He was oblivious to fear.
It's unbelievable. And I don't know, did you ever make a determination? Is it that he's oblivious to fear, or did he just make a conscious decision that what was before him was important enough to proceed?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I got to know Draper probably as well as any of the people. I did as much as I could to get to know all the characters. I spent, I almost felt like I was trying to get in the head of a character before you write about them is almost like an actor trying to get into the head of a character before they play them. Like, what motivates them? And with Draper, I had, this huge advantage of, all he saved everything. He saved all of his papers. I was able to go to his daughter's house. His daughter was kind enough to let me spend 2 days just rooting through everything that she had in her this massive file cabinet that her dad had kept with all of his papers in it. And I was just, I was able to read his mail. I would see, how he would communicate with his family, his wife, his dad, and he really just he believed that this was the most important thing, that winning this war was the most important thing. He was a bit of an idealist. He was one of the first Americans to see Hitler as this existential threat, and he knew that the United States had to have this, the leading role in dismantling both the Third Reich and the Japanese Empire. And he couldn't imagine a scenario where he wasn't in the front rank of that mission. And you saw that time and again. You saw it when he went to France to drive ambulances, when he had no business being in France driving ambulances. You saw it when he went to, the United Kingdom to dispose of bombs, when he had no reason being in the United Kingdom disposing bombs. And he just kept doing that time and again. I think a lot of it had to do with this relationship he had with his father. Like, his father was this titan in his head. His dad was, one of the most famous destroyer skippers before the war, and he went on to lead all the destroyers by the end of the war. He's trying to measure up to his dad, but at the same time, he just, he wants to be like his dad. He just that father-son relationship is one of those ones that you always kind of had an eye out for. So
I think I'm glad you didn't say this, and I don't want you to say it. The reason what I'm about to say, I don't want to spoil it for anybody listening. But the story of Draper Kaufman is what I personally felt to be the most inspiring of the entire book, because when you say the unlikely hero, you're understating it. Like, this guy is the last person in the world who it sounds like should have become who he is. And, it does sound like his relationship with his father has a lot to do with that. But also, there's tons of lessons to be learned here. And one of it is, what can be overcome with, mind over body. Another can be what can be overlooked when you take someone and you look at their score on a vision test and say you're not good enough for the Navy, and this person becomes freaking Draper Kaufman. Like, it's insane. It's a lot to think about. And at the end of the discussion on Draper Kaufman, there's a single sentence that reduced me to total tears in this book. And I'll tell you offline, but I just want people to know the spectrum of emotions that I felt while reading this is inspired on a regular basis. I've laughed out loud reading it. Alcohol-powered refrigerator is one line in the book where it just totally got me. And moments where I had, tears on my cheeks, because it is, it's, everything rings so true with the connection between combat, warfighting, the SEAL teams, the lasting impacts it has on men who fought, in these battles, and all the way up until the end of life. And also the way that people's minds and bodies have been ravaged by what they've put themselves through to go the route of special forces and the UDTs and Scouts and Raiders and the SEALs, and what and the people who made all that possible, the conventional Navy portion, the conventional military portion who made that possible as well. The sacrifices that we see people make throughout the course of this book are nothing short of miraculous, but at the same time, they carry those things so well and proudly with honor and integrity and all for the greater good as they go forward. And these are like the lessons that I take away after, putting the book down, rereading a chapter, just like ready to go outside and do something better than than I did it yesterday, because every story in this it's crafted, so well. And I hope someday we get the director's cut too, like everything that you.
Oh boy, everything I cut out. Yeah, it's probably 100 pages that wound up on the cutting room floor. Most of them needed to be there, and nothing that I didn't like. I tried to leave everything on the field, so to speak. I was there's very few. If you go through the end notes, there's very few like addendums that I added to an end note, or I think there's really only one or two footnotes in the book. Everything, yeah. If I couldn't leave it, I pulled it out. But there were, take a character like Phil Bucklew. Phil Bucklew, he's, you talk about how indispensable, Draper Kaufman is. He absolutely is. But Phil Bucklew, his entire career, it bookends Kaufman's. And not only does he start, naval special warfare, or he's there at the very beginning, but he goes all the way into Vietnam, and the SEAL teams wouldn't have become what they are, had it not been for his, very very important, hand on the rudder in that one moment. But Draper was, or not Draper, but Bucklew was one of those characters who I wrote about him in chapter 2 in my Scouts and Raiders chapter. I wrote about him in chapter 6 on my China chapter. I wrote about him again in my Korea chapters. I had all these, stories about Bucklew that, I thought were great. But when I got to the end, and I realized like all of that, sort of buildup got kind of lost if you didn't front load it into this one moment where Bucklew, he takes center stage. And he's not, this peripheral character in all these little episodes, but he's the most important person for this moment. So I had to strip all that stuff out of the preceding chapters and put it right there, so you really got the impact of it. But yeah, it's hard not to, get overwhelmed by some of these stories. Like I almost every one of the chapters is talking about a mission or a unit that does some sort of underdog, raid, or some unlikely or impossible thing. But the more I looked at it, each of the characters that made that happen had all, often had these, equally unlikely biographies to precede it. Martin Watson, for instance, he'd been a POW in World War II. He'd gotten released. He went home to Connecticut, and he was so racked by post-traumatic stress and everything like that. He fought almost every day that he was out. He was arrested something like 76 times before he was forced to go back into the Army. And I was going down his rap sheet. I found this at the National Archives, and I was going down it line by line by line. Disorderly conduct, fighting police, drunkenness. It was just, I mean, he should have been in prison. He shouldn't have been a Ranger. But he gets back into the Rangers, and he not only leads one of the most daring raids of the Korean War, but manages to survive this heartbreaking series of capture and recapture and escape and recapture again and torture. And it's hard not to, when you're going through some of that research, it's hard not to find yourself. I suspect the reason that you're having that emotional moment when you're reading the book is probably because I was having a similar emotional reaction when I was going through the research. I had to walk away from this stuff lots of times. I always tried, when I was at an archive, I tried not to look at what I was getting. I would just take photo after photo, and I would leave the archive with almost like 4,000 images that I would subsequently go through in the comfort of my, office. There was a couple of times where I didn't do that. And one of those instances, when I was going through the raid on Cisterna, I found the transcript, between Darby's radio operator and the first battalion radio operator in the field. And you just read it line after line, and that history is right there. It goes from bad to worse to tragic, and you're there with the guys. And I couldn't stop reading it. And I had to, walk away from the desk. I had to walk, just to collect myself. And hopefully that comes through in the writing, because I'm just as surprised by everybody that's reading this.
Yeah, you specifically in that example that you cited there, you chose the portions of that transcript to share about Darby's Rangers, and that's another moment where it's overwhelming, and yet I want you to know that it comes through very clearly and is received. But by me, to me, this book is a lifetime achievement, and it's life changing for me to read. I mean, it's like a gift. I don't know how to describe it. Getting to read it is like how lucky am I that I get the opportunity to read this book, like that it exists. And you talk about the biography, like you do a great job of painting the picture of who these people are when we meet them, when we come across them in the book. And then that gets me to thinking, and I just one question I wanted to ask you, and answer. You can not answer this or whatever, but as I go through it, and I just think like the way when you paint the picture, it's like, man, if any one of these small details in this person's life didn't happen exactly the way that they happened, they wouldn't be who they became. And Navy SEALs could have never been a thing. What do you make of that? Have you taken any time to think about that? Like, all of these things happened in just exactly the way that they needed to. And without every single one of these events, it's speculation to say, but we could have Navy elephants. Anything could be different. Anything could be different.
Yeah, history's like that, though. History, you don't get clarity on history until you have some perspective on it. That contingency, it is fascinating, and I don't have the answer to it, but I think it's what brings us back. Even our own lives are a series of contingencies. Just the fact that each one of us exists. If your parents hadn't met at a certain time, and we're all just kind of miracles. But you're right. There was nobody in the beginning of this quote unquote evolution that said, I want to create a naval commando unit that can go anywhere, particularly into the mountains of Pakistan and kill an arch villain. Nobody thought that a Navy unit was going to develop into that when the Scouts and Raiders are formed in Fort Pierce. But somebody was saying, here's a problem, and we have a solution to fix it, or we have guys that are in the instance of the Scouts and Raiders, you have a handful of former professional football players. NFL, football players. And you relegate them to, driving, landing craft. Anybody that thought that these former NFL quarterbacks weren't going to grow beyond, being skippers for, landing crafts, you're not being realistic. Of course, these people are going to push the boundaries of the assignment that they got initially. You just don't know where that's going to lead. and you don't know how that's going to, interact with, say somebody like Mary Miles in China. You have this pool of, really impressive talent, but that really, pool of really impressive talent doesn't have any place to, operate or, come onto the stage or meet opportunity until you take this unit and you plant it, in the middle of a guerrilla warfare or a guerrilla war, surrounded by, hundreds of thousands of Japanese.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I want to just add really quick for anybody listening, if you haven't already ordered the book, it's, fix that. And the the stuff in Korea is particularly like, unbelievable, the heroics that people acted out in Korea. It's amazing. It's one of my favorite parts of the book. That one story you were alluding to of the survival, it's amazing. It's an amazing story.
It's amazing to me. Like, I mean, Korea is a largely forgotten, war for most Americans, and I don't know why. I mean, the lengths that some of these guys go through. I mean, it's incredible. The one character that I that doesn't seem to that I was particularly inspired by was Eugene Clark. Eugene Clark, who scouts the invasion beaches for Incheon. He's totally forgotten today, and he was, as far as I could tell, he was a totally untrained, unprepared, almost he was an interpreter and a geography clerk. They get sent on one of the most important operations of the Vietnam War, and he just sort of invents it. He invents all the things that he's doing, and I mean I can't imagine if we sent somebody as unprepared as a Eugene Clark on a mission of such importance. But the fact that we did, and the fact that he survived, and the fact that he went on to lead even more important raids, and he learned from his own mistakes. And I mean, I was overwhelmed. I was struck by it. So
yeah,
and I'm glad that this whole new generation of Americans gets to read about these people. They get to find you get to meet a Eugene Clark or a Draper Kaufman or a Phil Bucklow. That's the best part of this whole process.
Yeah, anybody who reads this book, I think, should consider themselves lucky to have the opportunity to. And I wanted to ask you, we've been going for about an hour, but I have if it's okay, I have a couple more questions. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, is there anything that you learned about yourself in this process?
Oh yeah. Yeah. When you leave the SEAL teams, you're leaving a very important a very important thing. You've made great friends. You've connected with folks that you have incredible respect for, and you have a mission. You have a unifying mission. And when you kind of take that away from somebody, weird things happen. I've watched people walk away from the SEAL teams or walk away from the military in general, and you need something to replace that. So guys get really involved in triathlons, or they get really into motorcycles. They get into something, and that becomes they almost have an obsessive quality to them. And when I left, I figured I just didn't have that. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't have any tattoos. I didn't start training for a marathon or anything like that. But I was missing that connection. I was missing that mission, that purpose. And I didn't realize it until I encountered this, and this became, this filled that, whatever that hole was, and it became, when I had been obsessed about, becoming a SEAL and, living up to the SEAL standard and everything like that, and going on deployments and missions and everything. This became my obsession, whether I knew it or not, or was prepared for it. It absolutely did. And it just, even when I wasn't working on the book, it was always in the background. And that was, I didn't have anything to equate that to except for, my experience, like trying to get ready for buds or trying to, this, constantly, like I was always thinking like I always had the paragraph that I left that morning in my head, and it was just on a loop. Like, how do I connect this paragraph to this idea or this episode? How do I, what's the point of this chapter? How are the Rangers why do the Rangers matter to the history of a Navy unit? I was always thinking about issues, and it was, I learned that as much as I didn't want to admit it, I had this obsessive quality too.
Thank you for sharing. Is there, I feel like probably a lot of this is the case, but how much of the content in the book completely surprised you, like came out of, in your mind, came out of nowhere that you uncovered along the way, and how much was you knew something about?
I would when I said in the beginning, I initially had structured this book as a 10-chapter book, and I knew that I was going to have a chapter on the SEALs in Vietnam when they sort of became what they are, and I knew I was going to focus on the Marine Corps Raiders at Macon Island, but I had specific units or characters that I was planning on focusing on in the remainder of it. I think only of the 10 chapters that I focused on, or I had outlined, only the first, last, and two others stayed the same. Everything else changed. Everything else was a surprise. One of the one surprise that I didn't I totally hadn't prepared myself for. One of the last missions that I went on in Iraq, we got ambushed and had a close teammate who he was wounded very badly. He was shot through the right eye, and a bullet exited out the back of his head. We assumed he was dead. He was not dead, but he was going to be if we didn't get a medevac helicopter out for him. So we coordinated kind of a two elements to sort of come to our rescue. A SEAL element came to our rescue, and a Marine major commandeered two Humvees and drove up this road, which we understood to be one of the most heavily IED roads in Iraq. He braved this road and managed to get to our position and put his two Humvees and their 50 cals between us and a landing zone helicopter. Now, I can break from that story to tell you that one of the first documents that I found when I was doing the research for this book was a document that had been written in the Vietnam War, or it was during the Vietnam War in 1969 by a recently a Marine Force Recon officer who he was trying to understand, how the Navy had created this unit when the Marine Corps, had never really created anything similar. And he was saying that, coming from this, place, he had just been a Marine Force Recon officer. And he was writing this report for the RAND Corporation. And ultimately, this report became really important in kind of shaping how I thought of this problem and understanding, like, giving me some of the ideas that, how I would go about my research. Anyway, that report was written by Francis West, or Bing West, who, he was a young man at the time, but he's become a huge historian since. And one of the surprises for me was that, this paper, which was really important for me in the beginning, it was important because Bing West was one of the first guys that read my book when it was done and actually provided a blurb for it, which was really great. But it was also, right around this time that I learned that that Marine major who came to our rescue in Iraq was Bing West's son. And you could never have, guessed that this connection would have happened, but it did.
Hair on my arm standing up. That's unbelievable. That is, and I mean, I can't think of a better capstone to start just letting people know how important it is that they pick up this book. It's just By Water Beneath the Walls it's my new. I only read nonfiction books. It's my new favorite book, and it's a story that if you have any interest in naval history or military history, you have to own this. You should get it in every version, including Audible and hardcover and paperback. There's pictures in the actual paper version, which makes it worth it, for me, for someone simple like me. That was great. And so, and did your teammate, he made it?
Yeah, he did. He's a detective in Chicago.
Unbelievable. It's just, the world is a weird place sometimes, the way that things connect. You've put together a record of history that it belongs in a museum, a copy of it. And you're like, and I worry, because now when I listen to you, and I think everyone should, Google you and listen to everything that you ever say, because I think that you're a living record of history now. That would it be fair to say that you might be the most knowledgeable person alive on the history of the SEAL teams living today?
No, I'm not. I mean, my knowledge goes up to 1970. After that, everything gets, I haven't done that archival research. There are several guys that are, I still go to them if I've got questions. Tom Hawkins is one, Master Chief, or Rick Knepper. Don Crawford. These guys have, not only, have they done so much of their own work and their own writing on the SEAL teams or on Naval Special Warfare, but their careers were so long that they've lived that history. So I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Yeah, no, well, thank you for the opportunity to educate myself. Or you educated me and many other people. It's I could go on all day. I can't say it enough. What you've created here, and you're a very humble person, and so somebody has to tell you how great. I'm sure you probably hear it, but somebody has to let you know how impactful this book is. Not just that it's well written or that it's well researched, but that it's changing people's lives, and it inspires me. So I want you to know that, and I really mean it.
Thanks, Max. I appreciate it.
Is there anything that you want to say to people listening before we wrap it up?
No, thanks everybody. Hope you enjoy the book as much as I enjoyed writing it. So, thanks.
Absolutely. Hang on the line there, Ben, and I'll be checking with you in a second. I'm just going to close out the show.
Great.
Well, I don't know what else to say, guys. That was incredible. Ben Milligan is an incredible guy. He is an American hero, former Navy SEAL, and he's written one of the greatest gifts to the SOCOM Special Warfare community that we'll ever have, which is this book, By Water Beneath the Walls. And you can't order it online fast enough. Do yourself a favor and pick up a copy. It's a book that will inspire you, make you laugh, make you cry, and have you going back for more. So with all that being said, thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everybody in the chat. I hope we got enough of your questions answered. And if you have any more, send them my way. Maybe I'll reach back out to Ben at some point. And with all that being said, thank you guys for being a great audience. I look forward to talking to you all very soon. And for now, that's the Scuttlebutt.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.